Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of CFS Alert. I'm so glad you've come along. Today, I have a very special guest, Rivka Solomon, who has been a patient with the disease for 32 long years, but has also been enormously active as an activist. Rivka, welcome to the broadcast. Do you remember when you got the disease, when that first day, which most people seem to remember, which is one of the interesting things about the condition?
I sure do. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Llewellyn. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. And I want to thank you for all the work that you've done for our community over the years. And as you know, we've been trying for a long time to do this, and I keep having to cancel. I'm so sorry about that because of my health. Which we'll get more to later about how my health gets in the way of my advocacy. But I sure do remember that first day. I got mononucleosis when I was 21 years old. And two of my roommates got it at the same time. And they got better in about 6 weeks. And I essentially never got better. I was bedridden and homebound and barely able to brush my teeth for a full year. And then I went into what I call a semi or quasi remission. And for 7 years, I was still dragging my butt around everywhere I went. I was exhausted. I could be bedridden for a few days at a time, but I was able to lead a relatively, I would say, quasi-normal life. But 7 years into that, I got my second infection, and that was pneumonia. And that was during the first Gulf War, December 1990. And after that pneumonia, that was it. I was down. And I've been down ever since. I say that I'm tethered to my bed. I'm pretty much in bed or near bed all the time.
But you do sometimes manage to get out. I know I saw you at an event in Boston, but that's rare, right?
I'm not able to get out a lot. I would say I'm homebound probably 85% of the time. And I'm bedridden probably somewhere between 60 and 70% of the time. Yeah.
When did you decide that you couldn't just be sick, that you had to do something for the community of people with myalgic encephalomyelitis?
Well, I don't think any of us decide to just be sick, of course. All of us push ourselves as much as we can to do whatever we can for the community. I always say that my body dictates what I can and can't do. But ever since the beginning, I've been sick now 32 years of my life in or near bed. And for that entire time, I've been doing some type of advocacy at a great cost. So I can often be very, very sick for days, weeks, or months after every single advocacy effort I do.
What sort of advocacy have you done? Quite a lot, I gather, over 30 some years.
I know.
I've seen you on PBS. I've read articles you've written.
Yeah.
I think I've even facilitated the publishing of some articles.
You certainly did.
How do you do this? How do you manage? You get up in the morning and you think so much to be done. How much of it can I do?
Right. So that's the thing. Because of the situation that we have been put in with ME, there's almost no angle of this illness and our need. I mean, we have needs in terms of the media and getting the word out in the media. We have needs in terms of Capitol Hill. We have needs in terms of educating healthcare providers. It's just an unending litany of needs.
What do you think? Let me interrupt a minute. What do you think of the need for community work, to people to visit the sick and counsel the sick and to tell them they're not alone when they're lying there desperate in their beds?
That is so incredibly needed. And there is a dearth of that. I would say it's almost non-existent. And not just that, but things that are about basic survival, like, for example, getting a blood draw in your home. I once spent about a year so sick I couldn't leave the house. And this wasn't that long ago. And I had to get a blood draw. and I couldn't find any service that would come to the home and do the blood draw. So it's not just company and support, but it's basic services. Of course, things like, well, the coronavirus has changed some of that. There's a lot more delivery, for example, from, grocery stores and such. But I wanted to get back to your question about how I manage sort of day to day. I would say every single day I wake up feeling like a Mack truck has hit me and utterly and completely devoid of any energy and strength and brain. I have very severe cognitive dysfunction. And I wake up with that. And yet I'm driven. I'm the daughter of two activists. So I'm driven to try to do as much as I can, regardless of that type of exhaustion. And that's sort of counterproductive because we all know that resting is really helpful to us. But I will push myself as much as I can. So everybody, don't use me as an example. I push myself and I will try to write an article and then pitch it to the media, which you have helped me with. Thank you. I will try to organize an event. I will try to help all the different organizations. I've worked with all of them, ME Action, OMF, Solve. And I just want to say for the record, I have been having a wonderful past few years working with MassME, the Massachusetts ME, CFS, and FM Association. We have worked together to organize some pretty amazing events, two of the largest events ever held, in-person events ever held in the history of ME that I know of, for ME, for awareness raising for ME, and worked with the Health and Disability Partnership at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So we've done some really amazing stuff together with MassME. So I wanted to make sure that I gave MassME a shout out.
I too have been very impressed with MassME and the work they've done, generally low key, but very effective. What are your goals with your activism? Is it simply to make the public more aware of this terrible need? Is it to push research? Is it to get more funding from the government and other sources? Is there a particular goal that you work towards, Rivka?
Well, I would say check, check, check with every single one of those boxes. So like I said at the start, there is not a single angle of this disease that isn't needed. We need everything that you said. So my primary goal has been raising awareness, but I've worked with Capitol Hill. I've worked on Capitol Hill. I was the constituent who brought in Ed Markey to become an advocate for ME, our champion on Capitol Hill. I've worked in the State House to get Governor Baker proclamation for ME. I've worked with the media.
That is Massachusetts where you live.
That's right. I live in Massachusetts.
Right. You have one thing on your side. It's not much, but that is there are doctors in Massachusetts that actually know what this disease is. There are states where there is no clinician practicing in the ME space, which is a terrible and frightening thing.
I would say that there are probably 5 doctors in Massachusetts who know ME. There's probably 3 I would feel safe recommending people to go see, which is terribly scary because there's up to like 69,000 of us with ME in Massachusetts. But I do want to say one more thing about that. I think this probably is already on your radar, Llewellyn, but we did an event, the MassME did an event with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's Health and Disability Partnership. And we had the event focus on post-infectious chronic illness, not just ME. So we had somebody with long COVID, somebody with Lyme disease, and somebody with ME on the panel. We made sure that it was a very multicultural panel. But I would just say that all of those diseases have very, very similar symptoms. And those, handful of doctors that I mentioned in Massachusetts are seeing patients from all of those communities. And there's so much, we have so much in common with all of those communities.
The symptoms of long haul COVID are remarkably similar, or they're duplicative of ME. What is your own feeling about that? And what has mass ME discovered about that? Is there a feeling that this is, in fact, the same disease, or it is a related imitative disease?
Well, I would not say that mass ME has a position on that. My personal belief is that, like every virus historically that's ever happened, there's always a group of people that remain sick from that virus. And usually it's somewhere around 10%. They might have specific particularities that came with that specific virus. But the three commonalities, the three common denominators are unrelenting exhaustion, cognitive dysfunction, and PEM, or post-exertional malaise. And that we see in spades in the long COVID community. And I have been working with the long COVID community as much as I can. I've been very privileged to be part of a support group, an ongoing support group. It just ended, actually, that had both ME and long COVID patient and patient advocates on it. And it was one of those examples where the old timers like me and other people with ME were meeting with the new kid on the block, the long COVID folks, and we were relaying information about the symptoms, how we address the symptoms, and also how how we approach advocacy. And it's been a wonderful experience. It was predominantly women of color. It was all women of color, except me. I was a white ally there and a longtime ME advocate. It was predominantly Black women. And it was such a wonderful experience to be part of that group.
I found it very difficult to find anybody who knows anything about ME in the Black community. And I did a little bit with Joe Madison, who's an African-American broadcaster and colleague and friend of mine. And it was new to him, and it was new to his audience, who did not know, some of whom thought they had it, which, as you know, people think they have it, and some do, and many don't. But it seems to me that if it's bad for white people, it's even worse for people of color who are afflicted.
Right, of course. So anytime you're from a community of people that is treated with less respect, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's a person of color, any community is going to be compounded with that racism or oppression or prejudice, in addition to the crap that we already get just because we have the disability ME. I do have some wonderful people, I was just mentioning them. I do have some wonderful people who I'm sure would love to do interviews with you, Black women. So I would really love to recommend them to you.
We'll do that. I don't want you to make a judgment. You're not a doctor, but you've been involved a very long time. Do you feel that progress is being made? Sometimes I've been broadcasting and writing about ME for over a decade. I feel that we really haven't come very far. How do you feel?
It's a complicated question. So on the one hand, I agree with you. When it comes to seeing movement, for example, from the NIH, in terms of funding ME research, which of course ME Action has been so wonderful in terms of pushing NIH and Solve and OMF, pushing them to take ME more seriously.
These are the big activists.
Yes.
Groups.
In terms of getting more respect and translating that into money from NIH, I would say we are stalled there. And I am personally, as an independent advocate, I am an independent advocate. And personally, as an independent advocate, I'm a believer in a shame campaign, a publicity campaign of shame, really from a moral standpoint, targeting the NIH. But on the other hand, Llewellyn, I feel like there is reason for hope. So for example, I submitted an essay to, as you said, to PBS this year, to the PBS NewsHour, a really well-respected news show. And they accepted my essay. They interviewed me, distilled it down to 4 minutes, and they featured me in their brief but spectacular feature. And 1.1 million people saw that interview live when it aired, and another 120,000 watched it on PBS social media. And then I got an essay published in the Washington Post about what it's like to be a disabled Jew with ME. And I've been working with researchers, and I mean, the list just goes on, and I see the movement forward. It feels like drops in the bucket. But here's another thing to be excited about. We, MassME, held an event at MGH IHP, the Mass General Hospital Institute for Health Professions. 650 healthcare professionals attended. These were students and healthcare professionals, nurses, physical therapists, and they came and sat and listened to an hour and a half of us talk about ME. So there is movement forward. The film Unrest that Jen Brea put out, that got a tremendous amount of attention. So things are happening.
But are they happening scientifically? We still don't have a biological marker that we can draw blood and say, you've got it, or whatever bodily fluid you want to use. We don't have it. We have it for most diseases. And that is one of the big problems with clinicians. They want to know what the patient has, and they don't have the time to study and listen. Most doctors now give you 7 or 10 minutes. That is not enough to explain a history of suffering, and patients leave very frustrated. I believe that most patients have to see 12 doctors before they get someone who will listen and who may know what or have an idea that they have ME. It's quite frustrating. Obviously, it's terrible for the patients, but it's also a frustration in the medical community that they can't do quick diagnosis. We live in an age of quick diagnosis where we go to the doctor and they take some tests and tell you what you've got, and you can't do it with ME. And it is appalling and strange, scientifically curious, that we've been unable to unravel this thing enough to be able to have a biological marker.
It's a huge moral failure on the part of the NIH that they have not funded this kind of research that would allow the information that you're saying we need. It's so true that we need it, and it's been left on independent groups, private groups like OMF and others, Solve, to raise money for research. And who are they raising the money among? They're raising the money from people like me who don't have much money because we've been disabled for so long. And same with advocacy. Can I just I would like to say from my heart that we need healthy people in the advocacy community. So folks, if you have family or friends that care about you and they care about ME, please try to bring them into the advocacy community, because people like me and other advocates, we do the work and then we collapse and we can't function for months at a time because of a small task that we undertook. So we desperately need healthy advocates.
Many of the patients I've spoken to suffer from terrible loneliness because their caregivers have become fatigued, drifted away, marriages have dissolved, lovers have gradually left the scene. How do you deal with loneliness?
Well, thank goodness for the internet, because there are forums where people are constantly saying to me, you're the only person I can talk to. I talk to people from all over the country all the time about their struggles with ME and now long COVID. And I am constantly shepherding them towards these forums, because without the internet, there would be a much more loneliness. The trouble is, of course, that some of us are so sick that we can't even engage with the computer. I'm very lucky. I have a partner, a life partner, and he's been extraordinarily helpful to me. I would not be able to do this advocacy without him. Sometimes he has to bring me meals in bed because I can't even sit up. So I've been very lucky, but I will say, for those who don't have partners, I totally understand the struggle, and thank goodness for the internet for those who can engage with the internet.
I have thought about that often. The internet must be a great blessing. Before it, the lonely were absolutely isolated in their unhappiness, their misery, and their sense of being unloved and unwanted.
I don't know if you've been reading, Llewellyn, but the rates of suicide in the long COVID community are extraordinarily high. And I would say that that's probably the case also in the ME community. I personally have lost a lot of advocate friends who found that life was unbearable with ME, physically unbearable. And I'm sure that loneliness plays some kind of role in that. It's not because of psychological reasons that people are choosing to take their own lives. It's for physical reasons that they can't care for themselves. So I just wanted to say that also motivates me as an advocate.
I'm aware of this. I get a lot of correspondence from people who say they're thinking of committing suicide, or they're praying not to wake up in the morning, or they wish their lives would just end. They can't take any more of the pain, the suffering, the isolation, and this terrible sense, you look well. I mean, you look fabulous. It almost makes it worse. Life is going on, other people are living full lives, and yet you can't participate. You're there, lost in plain sight, hidden in plain sight from normal life.
Right. And we're so sick that we can't get out of the house much of the time. And when we do get out of the house, that's when you see us, when we're feeling well enough to get out. And then you don't see us have the payback later. I will say that I'm moderate. I am a moderate patient. And so being moderate, there are mild when people are still probably able to work. There's moderate like me, and then there's severe, and then there's very severe. And as a moderate patient, I am able to engage more, such as I'm doing with you, or being able to go occasionally to the grocery store.
I know of two severe, and I saw one of them permanently bedridden, unable to tolerate sound, light, or touch.
Yeah.
I mean, that bad. I've seen others who have been very ill for several years, which I think is your story, then some modicum of improvement, but always with this price you pay. If I go to dinner with my friend, I may have to be in bed for 2 days, but I need to see my friend because it's a very lonely.
Yeah.
I find that people get a lot of comfort from pets. And
yes.
It works best. Well, of course, there was a lady who, Tova, I think her name was, who wrote the book about just studying a snail.
That's right.
And a very wonderful little book it is too.
Yes.
But there are also, I found that cats are important because cats take less care.
Well, it's very interesting.
You can't have a dog, you've got to walk it 3 times a day.
It's very difficult.
Loving as dogs are.
It's so interesting that you're saying that about cats, because I am now writing my life story. So ME has been the project of my life. It has been my life project. As that's the case, I have decided, especially during long COVID, this time of long COVID, to write my story of my experience as a bedridden activist with ME, as a bedridden advocate. And I just got to the part in my story where I befriended a cat because I was so sick I couldn't interact with humans. And I befriended a cat, and now I'm at the part in the story where I have to give up the cat because I did not have the energy or the strength to even take care of it, to feed it. Cats are very independent. So that lets you see how very, very sick I was at that time. And it's very interesting because for me, over the years, the illness has gotten better or worse. I call myself a jack in the box because I will be bedridden for months at a time, especially after trying to engage in any kind of advocacy. And then I will pop back up and I'll be able to engage again. And then I will go back to being inside the box.
I have a very close friend, and that is her story too. Sometimes she's very ill and cannot get out of bed for several days. And sometimes she's able to have what looks like a normal life for 1 day or 2 days. Yeah. And then the price comes in.
But I do want to leave people with a sense of hope. So I do want to say a few hopeful things. Here's one. we did do this. I don't even know which one to share with you. I already told you that we held the biggest event, Mass ME, organized the biggest event ever held in person for ME. It had 650 healthcare professionals in the audience. PBS aired my essay or my interview about ME. 1.1 million people saw that. I told my rabbi recently at my synagogue about how I hope that we still have Zoom even when the pandemic is over. And I told him how Zoom during the pandemic has allowed me to have a life with a Jewish life with my synagogue. And he was so moved by that email that I sent him that I asked him if I could write the email to the entire synagogue, and he agreed. And then everybody flooded me with emails about how moved they were by my letter. And that brought on us organizing a panel at my synagogue and then at other synagogues, and the coalition organization for all synagogues in Massachusetts. We had an event there via Zoom. So this is I'm sort of losing my ability to think clearly right now, but I'm trying to explain that the outreach that I am doing now is resonating with people, and the raising of awareness is happening.
I do think I've done a fair amount of interviewing at the National Institute of Health. I know the history. I know that there was very little funding. Sometimes it was diverted. There are people who feel that Dr. Fauci, now famous for COVID, had wrongly classified ME as a women's disease, hinting at female hysteria. But I do think that a lot of good work has been done.
I do agree that sexism has played a big role.
I think things have changed a lot. And I think it's partly because of advocacy, and of course it's been accelerated by COVID, but there was a definite palpable change before COVID towards a lot more serious. There are some anomalous things. Researchers in the field say they need more money, and NIH says they're not getting the projects. And there seems to be a disconnect between people doing research and people funding the research, and that needs to be resolved.
Well, it is on the NIH to break that cycle. That is on them to find a way to bring in researchers. If they're not getting the grants, they need to reach out. But also there's people like Ron Davis who are writing, from what I understand, hypothesis-driven grants. The NIH should be willing to support those.
Ron Davis is in California
at Stanford.
Stanford.
Sorry. That's right.
Yeah, we must tell people who these people are.
I'm sorry. Yes, of course, Ron Davis.
We can't do this as inside baseball.
That's right. That's
or
right.
In my case,
but I do think that you're right, that during this time of COVID and long COVID, ME, thanks to ME Action's amazing work reaching out to the media, we have gotten a lot more mentions in media. So we've been that's one good thing that's come out of long COVID. But I hope the NIH does not just decide, which it sounds like they have, but I hope they have not, that all we need to do is do research into long COVID, and that that all boats will rise then, and ME will benefit from the research that that's done on long COVID. NIH needs to up their game in terms of funding ME research. We have been funded a tiny little amount of money, $5 to $13 million a year. That is so small for ME research that it is laughable. It's just, it's almost more of an insult to give us that than to give us nothing. Anyone who knows anything about money on Capitol Hill knows that 5 to 13 million is absolutely nothing. It's neglect. There's almost no words for the moral abandonment that NIH is responsible for, and the physical abandonment, of course.
NIH is now spending more, and with 1.15 billion
for long COVID
allocated. There must be some spillover, but I'm sympathetic to your point of view that this should be directly spent on ME, not as a byproduct of research on another disease, which may or may not be related. Because the symptoms are the same, it does not mean they are the same disease. And that's a challenge.
By the way, I just want to say I'm so glad that the NIH gave that money to long COVID. This is not to disparage long COVID in any way. I'm a big supporter of people who are struggling with long COVID, and I'm constantly talking to people with long COVID, and I do not want to see them struggling as they are for another day. So that money was well spent on long COVID. It's just that ME should be getting its fair share.
Just so we don't give people the wrong impression, money comes through the Congress. It has to be allocated. It is not totally at the discretion of National Institutes of Health, especially when you get to the very large sums.
Some of it is at the discretion of the National Institutes of Health. For example, I was told by a researcher that Francis Collins had something called the Common Fund.
He's just retired as the director.
He was the director
of the whole thing.
And from what I understood, he did have some discretion in terms of what he could do with some of his money. This is not my area of expertise as an advocate, so I shouldn't speak to it. But it is true that Congress needs to do more, and that is where Solve has been leading the fight on that front. Solve ME is a wonderful ME organization that has been leading that fight.
I think on that note, we better leave this. Good on you, Rivka Solomon, for all the great work you've done in great personal adversity. I think the whole community thanks you.
Oh, thank you, Llewellyn, for the amazing work that you have done interviewing people over the years. You have an incredible library that will stand the test of time. And I thank you so much for allowing me to be part of that.
Thank you. All the best. Cheers.